So I'll get started while we set up. Thanks everyone again for coming here. I'll say this, my name's Steve Buckley. I'm the General Manager of Transportation, originally from Philly, so I can detect an accent. I'll say use guys. Anyway, thanks for coming. I'll say my background, and I think Jesse, your background as well, civil engineers. The electrical and computer science folks never really let us near their stuff because we were sort of the dumb engineers. But we're figuring out that you guys have a lot of power for things that we do in transportation. So we came here tonight to talk a little bit about what we're doing. And again, this isn't necessarily a sales pitch. It's as much about just sharing what we're doing and trying to brainstorm ways in which we can tap into the things that you do to help us do our job better. So a little bit about our background. We oversee all the surface transportation in the city except for transit. So roads, bridges, sidewalks, cycling, trails, parking policy, not parking management. We basically oversee about $15 billion in assets. And we're basically, again, primarily from a civil engineering background, not necessarily used to using this type of data that we have at our fingertips now to figure out how we can own, operate, and manage our city better. So obviously things like congestion are a big issue in the city. While we're talking a little bit today about primarily vehicular data, this stuff in my mind will apply to all modes at some point, and we are actually using it for things like transit analysis and cycling analysis. And with this crowd, I don't have to say it, but usually with the mixed crowds, I say, how many folks here have one of these? And the big game changer for us is GPS. And we literally are getting feeds of data, breadcrumbs everywhere throughout the city, really smart people developing algorithms that separate this stuff out, and they can tell us how, when, and people move within the city. So I'll quickly run through some things. Jesse's going to dive into some of the details. Jesse, your background, civil engineer, traffic, got into modeling, and then sort of most of the folks who got into this space did so by sort of just dabbling in it. And so Jesse's now been with the city for about 8 months, leading our big data innovation team, where we're trying to figure out how to use all of this data to do our job better. So how can we use it? Why is it important to us? How can we use big data? Examples of some recent work and some next steps. So why is it important? In theory, data should be driving everything we do. And I'd love to say that that's the case in government. It's not. We don't have a lot of data. I mean, the mayor calls me up and says, Steve, how was the road running yesterday? We don't have some computer that tells us how things are running all the time. We're going to get there at some point. But the thing is, we're basically developing some internal skills and some resources to figure out how we use this stuff better. Historically in our business, we did a lot of really labor-intensive data collection, things like surveys, things like trip trackers. What we typically got was very small samples for very small periods, and then tried to extrapolate that and assume that everyone behaved like that all the time. Not really great for planning. We moved into some technology, getting some digital. I mean, this is technology in our world: radar guns, automated counters, tube counts. This was sort of, we call it small data now, but this was how we collected data. Again, very small sample sizes at single points for small periods of time. So what really, we occasionally got into things like Bluetooth now, video detection. These are the tools that probably 10 years ago were fairly cutting edge. And what really has changed? And it was back in the 90s, and that photo looks like it's in the 90s. But it was transit agencies, and they wanted to know where their vehicles were, and they used to literally have guys standing out there with clipboards that tracked them. But ultimately, GPS was fairly cost efficient for these, and I think at the time they were probably about $5,000 a unit for them to track their vehicles. So over time, we started getting into more probe data. GPS prices came down. There was a vehicular probe data on an I-95 corridor in the U.S., where in most cases, logistics companies started feeding a lot of this data into a centralized warehouse, and we could track traffic. This is commonplace now. You can see every segment on the city, we have probably 100, 200 meter sections where we know what the average speed is. Again, this is just pushed out there all the time by products such as Google. This here was our Toronto cycling app. So we basically took an app and asked folks to log in their trips on things so we can track. We're in the process of developing a 10-year cycling network plan, and this is probably more sexy than really useful, but it gave us a sample size to see where people were traveling, which we didn't know before. And ultimately over time, if we do this with time series, we can track how things change. This here is products like Strava. This is primarily for recreational, but manages things like pedestrian traffic. So we're literally, I mean, we're all now equipped GPS-enabled people that are walking around, and all this stuff is being collected. We don't know how to use it. This is my favorite. These are 3 cats that had GPS tracked to them and their daily habits. The low cost of GPS. So how can we use big data? And sort of everyone presumes that sort of like we have this big computer center where we're sort of like we know what's going on all the time. We don't. First and foremost is simply describing what's happening. Are things bad? How bad are they? Where are they bad? Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? We don't know this stuff. But GPS-enabled data is starting to provide this on more and more of the network for literally every second of the day. And again, it's sort of a tsunami of data that's coming at us that, again, us civil engineers don't know how to handle. So we can now start communicating whether things got better, whether things got worse. And we're actually coming out with reports now that can tell us literally on a corridor-by-corridor basis, segment-by-segment basis, minute-by-minute basis, what travel flows were in the city. And again, while we're focusing on vehicles now, it's primarily because that's the best data sources that we have, but ultimately this turns into multimodal. Evaluating, we're going to start looking at things like when we put new policies in place, we can measure before and after. And again, in the past, it used to be very labor intensive and very costly to do this. So again, you take small sample sizes, it wouldn't be all that helpful. On the operating side, identifying issues real time. We have cameras on our freeway system. So we have about 80 cameras that feed back to our traffic operations center. We have about 1,100 kilometers of arterial roadway network, which a lot of vehicles travel on. We have no idea what's going on in those roads right now. Having things like even the Google Maps shows us where problems are occurring. And where I think our bigger issue is going to be is that more and more of the system is congested more and more hours of the day. And what we really care about is reliability and where things are different from normal. So we now have a backdrop of big data that can tell you that on a Tuesday at 7 o'clock at night in April, this road typically performs like this. And what we care about is it different than that? And if it is different than that, what can we do, and what can we do to get some eyes out there to figure out what's going on? So this backdrop of big data can be very helpful in helping us operate the system. Things like predicting, better trip planning. Obviously, it's a space that government probably is not going to get into. There's companies that do this, that do it very well. But again, traveler information is absolutely critical to what we do. And then finally, planning. So there's a lot of data that's coming out of this that ultimately we use these models that are really antiquated, hard to maintain, expensive, and make a lot of assumptions, lay on a lot of assumptions on a lot of assumptions. We now have basically a 365-day a year, 24-hour-a-day model of the city based on GPS maps. How do we turn that into something where we can better analyze what's going on and how we plan better for Toronto? So that's sort of the overview of sort of the big picture stuff that we're looking at. I'm going to let Jesse talk about how we're using this stuff. And what's really important in government is there's a lot of stuff we can do with this stuff that's really cool, make great visuals, but how does it drive decision making? And what I really care about and what I try to reinforce is actionable data, actionable information really. So how do we convert this data into information that helps us make a business case for doing something in government? So I'll turn it over to Jesse at this point. He can talk a little bit about some of our projects.
Thanks, Steve. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a, I don't know, teaser, I guess I could say, of some of the recent stuff we've been playing with. And I guess this all comes back, you know, if you go back to these categories here, it's pretty much all just falls under the first bullet here, which is describing. So a lot of the work I've been doing is just around the questions of how do we better understand traffic congestion in the city. And so, as Steve kind of alluded to, our feeling here at the city is that what really drives people's frustration, what makes people really upset in their commute is this sort of lack of reliability so, you know, if you picture a commute at 8 o'clock in the morning every day, what's not bugging people is necessarily that it's taking 60 minutes to get somewhere where, you know, if they traveled at 4 a.m. when there was no traffic, it would take them half an hour. What's really getting at people is the fact that one day it's 60, the next day it's 30, the next day it's 90, and people just have no way of planning their lives around it. So we're trying to get a better handle of what this means. And for us, what it means in terms of sort of actionable data and actionable information is how can we figure out ways of instead of just sort of saying we're going to tackle congestion overall, tackle it through better management of our system. So, you know, what are the things that drive these sort of fluctuations? It's your collisions on the roads, for example. So So can we get those off the roads quicker? It's also, you know, work crews that are out at the wrong times of the day blocking lanes when they don't need to be, or maybe those, you know, those crews can be out there more efficiently. Maybe it's, you know, malfunctions in our signaling system. All these type of things that, you know, they're little. They seem like little things, but they start adding up, and they just create this kind of chaos effect where who knows what's going to happen on any given day. Then you mix in weather, you mix in special events, Blue Jays games, all this kind of stuff, and then it's just sort of who knows what's going to happen on any given day. So just to sort of give you a few pictures of what we feel. So this is just a plot. It comes from a research study that was done, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, out of the U.S. And so these numbers aren't Toronto specific, but it's just an indication of where traffic congestion comes from. What are the contributing sources? So we sort of divide this into two types, what we call recurring congestion and non-recurring congestion. So your recurring congestion is just, you know, you have certain bottlenecks that happen every day of the week, and it's just kind of a supply and demand issue. You've got to have a lot more people trying to get to it through a specific point in your network that can really fit. A little piece that is dealing with poor signal times. Then you have this sort of other half of the pie, the red side of the pie, where you have, you know, 25% of its traffic incidents, 50% of its weather, 10% is work zone, 5% is special events. So we feel like it's, you know, this is where we can sort of make a bit of a dent in this problem. So just looking at some of the data we have, sorry, not quite the data yet. So a lot of the work that's done in the transportation field, because we've always had very poor data, just would speak in generalities about traffic congestion. It speaks in terms of averages. So, you know, this is your annual average of how long it takes to get somewhere. But the reality is, it's these sort of fluctuations in travel time that really get at people. So if this is, you know, a commute to work every day of the week, and this is their travel time, you know, it's these couple days of the year where they're just horrible that really stick in people's mind and drive frustration. So, you know, there's sort of two alternatives when you think about this. You can make, you know, a relatively small improvement in travel time by, say, you know, in 2014 you build some sort of massive infrastructure project, throw billions of dollars at a problem, and make some sort of, you know, in the grand scheme of things, relatively small improvement to travel time overall. But you can also make improvements that, you know, if you start cutting at these worst days of the month, you can have a larger sort of tangible improvement to how people feel about traffic congestion in the city, and that's through improving travel time reliability. And now I'll show you the actual data that we have. So this is a plot that looks sort of the same, but this uses actual data that we have from the City of Toronto. And this is tracking the travel times northbound on the Don Valley Parkway from Dundas to York Mills in 2014. So each point on here is 1 day of the year, 1 business day of the year. And what we use to get this is Bluetooth detectors. So that we have a detector at Dundas, a detector at York Mills. It grabs the MAC ID of a phone that drives by one of the detectors, matches that same ID when it gets to York Mills, and you get a travel time from point A to point B. It's the same technology that powers the changeable message signs that are on our highways right now. So when you're driving in on the Gardner, it says 20 minutes to Yonge by Lakeshore, 15 minutes by Gardner. It's the same data that's powering that. So what you can see is, you know, northbound travel time on Dundas to York Mills, it's bouncing around an awful lot. You know, there's this sort of, you know, 15, 20-minute band here that is, you know, fluctuating between on a daily basis. It's almost, you know, getting in the territory of kind of random scatter plot. On the flip side, if you look at the southbound Don Valley Parkway in the morning, also rush hour, you see it's a lot tighter. And what's really driving a lot of this is, you know, it's kind of depends on where you put your endpoints, but York Mills to Dundas, if anyone drives in the DVP, most of the problems are north of York Mills. So, you know, once you've filtered into York Mills and you're driving south into the city, it's a lot more reliable. But again, if you're flipping between these two plots, you know, there's a really big change in sort of how much the times bounce around. And we can actually do similar things using GPS data on streetcars as well. So this is the travel time on the 504 streetcar traveling between Bathurst and Jarvis. We can start to just get this information of, you know, not only just, you know, is it 50 minutes every day, but how much does it bounce around? What does it fluctuate? So just another piece of this using similar, this is now using GPS data. We can start to look at citywide, what are the most congested roads in the city? And at the same time, what are roads are also the least reliable? This is just a map that we put together that shows, again, 2014, in the afternoon rush hour, these are the most congested days of the year. And this is, using similar data that you get through, Google Maps. And using that, we can start to look at, okay, what are our top most congested segments? So this is the 50 most congested segments in the city. And if you just want to look at a few of them, like Lakeshore Boulevard, Yonge to York Street is the most congested in the PM peak period. Dufferin Street up at between Finch and Shepherd, I think is actually Finch and Steeles. Lakeshore from Jarvis to Yonge, Eglinton from Bathurst to Allen, and Black Creek Drive. So we can start to, look at all of the roads in the city in sort of using the same lens, the exact same data, same consistent forms of analysis, and be able to look at areas where, maybe this can point out some areas that maybe we didn't even notice or we didn't realize were as bad as they were, because most of the information we were relying on before was sort of subjective or anecdotal. You can do the same thing with reliability, which is in a way almost more interesting. These are the least reliable roads in the city. You can see some stretches pop out. This is Lawrence, just west of the Owl. Again, downtown has some issues. And then you can go through the same exercise. What are the 50 least reliable roads? And then what are the top 5? So you get some slightly different results. Here you get Spadina Avenue. And this isn't Spadina sort of at the spot where you think is the worst spot, which would be down south close to the Gardner Expressway. This is actually Richmond up to College. And again, this is reliability, so it's one day it's good, one day it's bad. So it's a situation where maybe one day it's relatively clear up there, and another day maybe something bad happens on the Gardner, and it's so bad that it's backing up all the way north of Richmond. So a few other ones, Lakeshore Boulevard, it's a common theme. Spadina again, common theme, and then Lawrence. So this is just sort of a bit of a flavor of the type of analysis that we're able to do now. And so just a little bit about next steps of where we're headed as a group, and a couple questions just for the room about how we can work with Civic Tech. So essentially we're just continuing to develop a work program for how we're going to continue to launch this out, look at data across a number of different modes, and just sort of start tackling some problems. One of the real challenges we're having is just getting a sort of better understanding of the technological and human resources needs in a government setting, because it's a real challenge, and it's not something that we don't have job profiles that match the type of skill set that we're going to look at. We don't necessarily have IT in government. You try to install a program on your computer and it takes 3 weeks. It doesn't really lend itself to iterative testing. 3 weeks is actually pretty good. Yeah, you need the general manager to call someone to get 3 weeks. And then we're also looking to kind of develop a network of practitioners amongst different cities in North America. And so finding ways that we can exchange ideas and not reinvent the wheel constantly. So if we can be sharing our code, sharing our ideas, sharing our ideas with other people who are facing the same problems, that's great. And then we just kind of want to spread the word on what the potential is that we can get from all this, and start to really show some tangible impacts and show some places where we've actually been able to take some action and solve some problems using this information. So just a couple of questions for Civic Tech Toronto, because you guys know a lot more about this stuff than we do, is what exactly does a modern tech-friendly city agency look like? Is there any good examples of one out there? Or something we should be modeling ourselves after?
Gov.uk.
Gov.uk.
Office of New Urban Mechanics, Boston.
Okay. What do they do?
A whole bunch of different stuff. One of their big projects was doing like a city hall on wheels that went around the city. They use a whole bunch of different techniques. It's Nigel Jacob, who's actually a Torontonian, who's out there to run it. They've got a couple. There's one in like Philadelphia, Boston.
My neighbor runs he ran the Philly one for a while.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool model, I'd say. They bring in outside talent, I think, and do kind of cross collaboration.
Yeah, so these are the type of questions on, as we're building out our capability, how do we do this best? Basic ideas like obviously open source, open data, open communication, just trying to be open with the community around us and leverage a lot of the knowledge that we don't necessarily have in-house is something that, seems like a no-brainer in a way to be able to sort of spread our tentacles and get, get some improvement or good from the community at large that's interested and engaged in these issues just like we are. And then I guess another open question is just sort of how to work together with the civic tech community. What's, it seems nice in idea that we're going to work together, but what does it actually look like? Is it project-based? Is it, you guys are sharing best practices with us and I'm not sure. I don't know the answers to all these questions. Is it providing guidance or sort of steering to, some of the ideas and where we're headed? Yep.
There was an idea for a civic hall in Toronto that would be space possibly at City Hall, possibly through CSI, where 3 levels of government and private sector and civic tech people could get together and act like this, but have to be a permanent space that could rotate and record. I don't think that idea is really taken off quite the way it could, but the idea itself is still sound. What's my going?
Actually, I would ask a direct question sort of back to you is, in the spirit of civic tech where people bring their problems and their questions here, what question sort of like are you looking to solve right now? What would be a project we could work through today, right? Just sort of that back in that direction, sort of the spirit of how civic tech organizes.
Yeah, so we're, like, a lot of the things that we're working on right now is, I guess I sort of slot it into two different categories myself. So one is using the sort of GPS data that we have here to try to build a better understanding of congestion. So that's sort of an ongoing thing. Where I'm interested in going with it is starting to link it in with a lot of the sort of external factors and other sources of data, whether it's incidents, collisions, weather, all this kind of stuff. So we're sort of building an internal team, or we are building an internal team to do this type of work, to do this type of analysis. Some of the other things that are happening is we have a lot of data within the city that's kind of locked in these horrible antiquated systems, and that just isn't getting used like it could be. So part of the questions are, what's some of the stuff that we should be prioritizing getting out quicker than others? What are people interested in using? And also, if we're going out and say updating our systems internally to store some data, whether it's traffic count data, for example, I'm not always convinced that the people that we have in-house who have been doing the same old for the last 20 years are necessarily the ones that are best equipped to know what the right way to store and manage and keep that data is in the year 2016. So some insights on that as well. I've read for example the Civic Tech paper that went to the whatever that committee was. I can't remember the name of the committee, but one of them was a better open data platform for the city of Toronto. It was one of the recommendations that came out of that. Can transportation as a division be using some of those ideas in how we package and store our own data?
You have a lot of really interesting maps. So there, my memory serves me right. You had a traffic map. You also had, say, a cyclist map, and you said that. Say, for example, for the cycling map, you were saying that you gave some people an app and they just cycled around the city. So where I'm going with that is, how much of this data are just people that you're employing in-house versus how much of this data is being collected via open source? Because like a huge thing that's really powerful about Waze or a lot of other apps that are really open source is that people are putting in the data that they want. So yeah, how much of it is currently open source?
That app was, Steve could probably talk more about it, but it was essentially it was first done out of San Francisco. And
They functionally gave it to us.
And they essentially gave it to us to launch it here. And it's just sort of a voluntary app, so anyone, it's most of the people who'd be using it are people who are engaged in civic issues and engaged in the bicycling community, and people who are, regular cyclists. So it's definitely sort of a self-selected little unique group of cyclists that's not necessarily representative of the whole population. I don't know, does that answer the question?
Yeah, but aside from that app, how about some of your traffic data? Is that also?
So all the stuff we have right now is we're buying it from third parties.
Oh.
So the stuff that I was showing, you know,
The probe data.
the probe data, yeah.
Now, your other, I'll say, frustration was we actually do, not a lot, but we do primary data collection, 2,500 signalized intersections. We're probably picking up data on 300 or 400 a year with new volume counts at specific points for specific times a day. Often put in antiquated databases that are not open and are not public friendly, to say that. So these are sort of some of the basic questions that we have. This is the system we've been running with since '93. We're just going to keep using it until it breaks. And that's sort of that's government at times. So
Crystal reports.
they don't know what you're talking about.
Some of us do. Some of us do. Some of us, thank you.
Lots of people here in government with experience with very bad government technology. But I wanted to take a crack at answering your questions. You know, and thank you both for coming here and showing up and engaging with the community. I mean, I think that's kind of the first step is really just showing up and having a willingness to engage with outside collaborators. I thought it was a good point of comparison. One of our early presentations when we were just forming the group was this fellow, I think it was Kevin Brannigan, someone can correct me on that, who was creating essentially a TTC trip planner before the TTC had a trip planner. And
Yeah, he was on the team of the traffic jam hacker.
okay, yeah, fantastic. So his experience, for those of you who weren't there, was essentially trying to get this data about TTC timing, you know, the timing between stops on various routes, getting that out of, you know, hundreds and hundreds of pages of PDFs and like manually extracting that and turning it into something that he could actually use. And he was going around and actually physically, you know, counting the number of steps in TTC stations and like you know, seeing what the infrastructure looked like so he could actually get the data to build his app. And once he had built this, you know, he went to the city of Toronto, he went to the TTC and said, hey, I have this app, you know, do you want to buy this from me? Do you want to, like, can I have your data? Like, can we work together? And the answer was, you know, a flat out no. This was a couple of years ago. It was like, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago now. But, you know, so things have clearly changed. But I think it just sort of reinforces that the first step is kind of showing up and being willing to engage.
Now, I mean, I'll say this, it's obviously, you know, understanding transportation is a little piece of this and trying to understand. But if there are folks here that are interested in this, and we did with Evergreen CityWorks, we did a hackathon back in October. There is a lot of people that are interested in this topic. And again, I know that it's not necessarily about vehicular movement, but we are trying to extend this. I mean, we're trying to get our legs under us here and figuring out what we can do and what our capabilities are. We're playing with TTC data, we're playing with cycling data. Ultimately, we probably will be using this in some ways for pedestrian information. But if there are folks that are interested in this, we're trying to figure out ways to engage so that we can benefit from sort of some great external knowledge and hopefully marry it with our sort of knowledge of transportation to sort of get at some real problem solving. And again, at times it's, you know, I don't expect to be able to walk into a place and 48 hours later, like, oh, we have the solution here. But it's often sort of, I always refer to as seed planter. Sort of, it may be just sort of getting a few things going, and it may take a year or two at times to sort of, but you sort of have to engage that, and you guys will see things through a different lens than we will, and we can hopefully bring the transportation lens in, and you guys can bring the, wow, you know, we can easily take all that data and smush it and present it in a way that we think it meets what you're looking for here, and that's sort of the marriage, I think, that we're trying to figure out right now.
Cool. All right. So I know there are tons of questions. Are you going to be?
I can start.
Okay. So Jesse will stay back a couple of minutes. So if you have any other questions, feel free to